Simon and Leigh for inviting me to speak today. I've broken this presentation down into two sections, and the cliche I'm talking about today is Electronica and more exploratory forms of electronic dance music. The two sections that I've broken this down to start with this first half with the underlined bit at the top, which is talking about what I've identified that we might analyse. The second half is or relates to the tools that we might use to analyse this form of music. And there are three sections I want to cover very briefly: structuring theories, classification of materials, and some software tools as well. So let's start with timbre. Timbral interplay and timbral shaping within works is common in this genre of music that I'm talking about here. Sounds are sometimes mimetic of real-world timbral mimesis, or their arrangement within a work could be described as having syntactic mimetic properties, such as Second Scout from Ortega's Anvil EP from 1995, whose lead line is evocative of human speech. I don't have that example to play because I don't have time, but I have other ones, which I'll be covering in a second. The use of space, the second formative element. The use of reverb is commonplace within this genre and is used to push sounds into the background. We could describe this as a use of concrete space, for example. The opposite of this can also be heard in many works where the ultra-dryness of sound can create a hyperreal clinical feel to a work. A good example of this use of space is a piece called Ultibuzz by Ortega from their 2008 Cryosdice album. In interviews, the band have talked explicitly about using space as a compositional narrative, which I think is a nice link between perhaps acousmatic or electroacoustic ways of working and this form of dance music. I'll play the example.
Volume on that thing.
Just go back. So one of the questions that was asked was who this analysis may be for, and I see this style of music as being particularly relevant to young listeners who may be new to ways of listening and ways of interpreting sounds. So the third formative element, the use of rhythm, I think sets a foundation for pieces within this genre and could really be seen as something to hold on to for young listeners, to engage them in something which may be familiar to them, but then is engaging them in something else that's taking place. We'll talk about some of those in a second. There are a host of examples within this form of music, however, that do not use rhythm as a formative structuring element, and there are many examples. Tree from Aphex Twin's Selected Ambient Works 2, for example, is just one of them. The music is born from techno, and the majority of works has vestiges of the beat, so irregular time signatures and erratic beats are regular kind of occurrence in this form of music, especially in later works from 2000 onwards. The fourth formative element is the use of pitch. Intervallic relationships can be an important element within this form of music, but are in many cases mundane and repetitive. Subtle shaping of frequencies and timbres, however, creates the expressiveness and dynamics within the works. This timbral shaping introduces an element of surprise or experimentation and can take the form of detuned elements, shifting amplitude or frequency envelopes, or subtly shifting placements. A good example of this is a piece called Vicious Circles by Autophonic from 2006. The fifth formative element, causal linkage, forms a large part of this genre of music, and I think it's one of the things that, to my mind at least, relates very intrinsically with electroacoustic music and this form of electronic dance music. Internal relationships between sounds within a work can suggest a syntax and an internal discourse of their own. However, the syntax is often abstract rather than abstracted, unlike the example I'm about to play from Monolake's 2009 album Silence. In this excerpt, what we hear is a gestural metallic sounding object, metallic sounding concrete object, which instigates the onset of a textural, elongated synthetic sound. It's important to note at this stage that later music in this genre that I'm talking about is becoming more and more, using more and more concrete elements and ideas that may be familiar to everybody else in this room, where earlier works were perhaps a little bit more abstract in their nature and more traditionally musical. The sixth formative element, structure. Pieces generally take a less conventional approach to compositional structuring rather than more traditional processes of other popular music. Structures are generally evolving and regularly exist on what might be termed as an environmental level. The seventh formative element is a bit of a cheeky one, really, just the idea of experimentation within work. So this can cover many aspects of contemporary composition within electronic dance music, such as algorithmic techniques, which we've already discussed today from my predecessors, creative use of effects, time stretching, resampling, and various other audio processing and structuring methods. Any analysis of this genre will need to take into account a number of these formative elements. Merely describing the music based on one single element alone will fail to uncover the whole picture. It could also be beneficial to ascertain what social situation the music was designed for. Much exploratory dance music is written for listening, but there are pieces which are clearly designed with the club, in inverted commas, in mind. And there are many composers which cross both of these worlds. So people like Aphex Twin and Black Dog, for example, have produced music which is very club-based, very limited dynamic range, but also sitting in perhaps a much more electroacoustic or more experimental frame. Any analysis should have its foundation primarily in experiential sonic content of the material and their relationships to each other with an acknowledgement of conventional music notation, if this is relevant to the work. A useful approach to analysis of this form of music might be to deal with topics listed here as formative elements. Any discussion about this music is healthy, and a deeper analysis of this genre can only serve to define it and allow others to understand where it sits within a wider framework of exploratory musicking. Despite what many in the community may say, analysis of this music is long overdue, and to my knowledge, there is no deeper analysis of this form of music taking place at the moment. So this brings us on to what tools may be useful within this genre of music. We may talk in terms of reduced listening or Schaefferian theory. Repetition is often rife within this music, and the use of real-world and concrete sounds are often placed alongside synthetic ones. And for these reasons, I think reduced listening is very much nurtured, which could have implications for teaching undergraduate students and potentially postgraduate students as well. Emmerson's language grid may be useful. Pieces can be described in terms of where they sit on the grid, whether mimetic or oral discourse is dominant. And as mentioned previously, pieces are often formed from abstract syntax rather than abstracted syntax due to their nature of sounds used. Dennis Smalley's spectral morphology could also be a useful way of explaining behaviour of sounds within works and how they're shaped over time. This may be less useful, however, for pieces that rely heavily on more conventional uses of musical composition and structure. Classification of materials. Electronica is formed from a range of sonic materials which can be described in terms of their frequency content as either pitched, noisy or distorted sounds, and their shape, whether short gestural sounds or elongated textural ones. Classification of articulation style may also be useful, so whether works are pitched or rhythmically carried, timbrally carried or spatially carried, or a combination of these. We may begin to classify musical discourse of electronica using these key elements. So bringing us finally to software tools, waveform display and spectral view are definitely required if we are to explore and disseminate the findings from any analysis of this form of music. A spectral view might also be useful to display, analyse and explain spectromorphological phenomenon within a work and how sounds are related both sonically and gesturally. Other features that could potentially be useful: annotation of wave or spectral view, and an easy way to export JPEG or some kind of visual file with options to include spectral waveform and associated annotations. A zoom feature, something similar, multi-channel layout options, and finally, and this is a bit of a blue sky idea, I guess, I have no idea how it could be potentially done, but some way of displaying spatial information within a work. So we currently have ways of displaying frequency, content, amplitude and location in time, but nothing to display whether a sound is close or far away. And how I see it, at least, lots of music, both electroacoustic music and this form of music, use that idea of space as a formative element, and it'd be good to display that in some way. Just finally, this form of music was where I kind of started from. It's why I'm so interested in it. My route to electroacoustic was using this music as a foundation, and I think there is a lot of potential here to engage young people in something which may be more familiar to us in terms of how we talk about sound and the ideas of electroacoustics. So thank you very much.
Thank you.